This week,
I think more countries are becoming aware they've got to step up their game before we go to Glasgow for the Conference of the Parties meeting.
countdown to COP. A month out from Glasgow, world leaders set the stage at the UN General Assembly ahead of the crucial climate summit.
We'll do everything in our power to help people in the short term, but what we will also do is make sure that we allow the market to work so the supplies get to the places that they need to.
One of the hot topics of conversation at the meeting, Europe's energy crisis. We break down what's causing it and how bad it's likely to get.
We're going to make it affordable for all companies and all countries to take the green approach.
Plus, it isn't just policymakers pledging climate action. Billionaire Bill Gates is joining forces with business heavyweights to rally support for some of the world's most demanding clean energy projects. I'm Kayleigh Lines in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green. It's now just over 1 month until the UN Climate Change Conference, also called COP26, in Glasgow. The criticality of the next decade will be at the top of the agenda, as the IPCC says we need massive investment in green technologies to avoid disaster. One person attempting to meet that challenge is Bill Gates, who started his $1 billion Catalyst Fund to kickstart climate solutions.
The model here is what happened with wind and solar and lithium ion. Those products had very high prices compared to conventional techniques. And fortunately, Germany, Japan, other buyers funded the scale up. And now those products fit the normal sort of client investing metrics. You know, those are mature and they're in this big scale up phase. The 4 areas we picked here, green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel, storage, and direct air capture, are at a much earlier stage where they have a very high green premium. But by designing scale-up projects with catalyst capital and government capital, we will learn, deploy these innovations, pick the right approach, and get that premium down in the same way happening in those other areas. So over this next decade, we need all the green technologies that can reduce in every type of emission to get to where solar and wind are. And so we get for the 20 years after that into this high speed scale up, and we're tapping into literally hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars. But this upfront design of the projects to pick the right partners, places, and bring those costs down. These are 4 technologies that are ready for that. In fact, we just put out a solicitation for people to say which projects would they like us to partner now that we have over $1 billion in capital.
I would just add one thing, Eric.
Sure, please.
Unlike when Bill talked about the pathway for solar and wind, that was a 30-year pathway to bring it competitive to hydrocarbons. We don't have 30 years. We don't have 10 years. And so to me, this is about the acceleration of the science and technology. This is about really emphasizing these areas where we have to focus if we're going to get to a net zero world.
Many economies are already benefiting from advancements in green technology as wind and solar replace conventional fossil fuels. But these advances aren't equally shared, and an uneven green revolution won't solve global emissions. Gates has a plan to tackle inequality by driving down the cost of climate solutions.
Today, many areas of emissions, like making steel and cement or aviation fuel, the green premium is very high. In many cases, almost double the price. And so if we try and do this brute force, only the richest countries or companies will be able to offset their emissions. Now, it's great that they're willing to do that, but we call it catalyst because by taking the resources and funding these projects, we're going to make it affordable for all companies and all countries to take the green approach, because we'll either get the green premium down to zero, which, as you say, for solar and wind, that's where we are. And so now it's just accelerating the scale up deployment of that gigantic electricity grid. But a lot of people aren't aware that, passenger cars with the lithium-ion batteries and electric generation, that's where we've made the most progress, but that's only a third of the emissions. And so that's why getting these other areas of emissions to be priced either close to competitive or actually completely competitive, that is the highest priority. And so going into Glasgow, having this partnership, including with the governments as well, making this concrete, I think, it shows the momentum that climate's gaining, and it, shows that we really aren't ignoring the fact that India and other middle-income countries, at today's state of the art, they won't deny that the electricity and the shelter to their citizens that going for today's green premium would imply. So I view this as a critical next step.
As one of Catalyst's founding partners, BlackRock's Larry Fink sees climate change as a risk to the entire global financial system. But he says investing with Catalyst isn't just about mitigating risk, it's also about creating a better world.
Already we're seeing an impact in society right now from climate risk and climate change. We are seeing insurance premiums going up 18% a year right now. So we're seeing a real impact from what climate risk is doing, from flooding, from fires. So we're seeing a big impact. And so the faster that we could find ways to mitigating the rising temperatures, I would say the more just society could be. And so to me, it's we don't have much time. And this is why when I learned about Catalyst and I learned about what Bill was doing, it was very clear to me why we needed to be a part of this, why we needed to invest the time and the money. And the key is also the time, because we need to be learning about these the new technologies and how to move forward. And we need to then inform our investors ultimately where we think the next opportunities are going to be too. And as Bill in his book wrote about, we need to employ $50 trillion to get to a green world. That, with the rising deficits that we see in governments, from our perspective, the 50 trillion is mostly going to have to come from the private sector. And I do believe that money will be well spent for returns. It will transform our economies. It will build new jobs. It will build new cities and new opportunities. So I look at this as an optimist. I don't look at this as a pessimist. But the key is to be that optimist. We have to jump on it now. We have to be investing today. We need to talk about it today, although much of the problem is in the future. But we're seeing more and more evidence of the problem today.
Coming up, surging energy prices in Europe are causing chaos, turning attention to the role of renewables. We'll discuss that and how big a part it'll play at COP in a few weeks' time. This is Bloomberg Green.
I'm Jennifer Zabasajja, and here's everything you need to know in green this week. The European Central Bank is warning a failure to mitigate climate change could significantly lower Europe's economic output by the end of the century. If natural disasters become more severe as a result of climate change, the region's GDP could drop by 10% by the year 2100, compared to a scenario where governments act. Also, oil and gas companies have been bankrolled by some of the biggest names in finance to tap the Arctic's vast natural wealth. According to a report by Reclaim Finance, Gazprom, ConocoPhillips, and Total Energies, they're among a number of firms expanding their fossil fuel operations in the region. The research says Arctic oil and gas output is set to climb 20% over the next 5 years. And finally, a group of nonprofits is urging the European Union not to cave into pressure to put new gas-fired power stations in its green rulebook. The letter, sent to the bloc's leaders by over 150 campaign groups, says to do so would undermine the European Green Deal. Some member states want the option to fall back on gas as they transition away from coal. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and that's your Green Brief.
Thanks, Jen. Long one of Europe's worst performing countries when it comes to tackling climate change, Ireland's Prime Minister insists green issues are now firmly central to government policy. Micheál Martin spoke exclusively to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde about his plans on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly right here in New York.
I think the key agenda item for Ireland on the energy front is wind, and we've been great developers of onshore wind. The next decade in Ireland will be offshore wind, and we have streamlined our planning application framework for investors so they have certainty in terms of applying to invest in terms of offshore wind infrastructure in Ireland. So that will be a key agenda item of ours, and renewables. We have a very strong climate component in our government and in our government programme, and that of course is not disconnected from the energy agenda, and there will be challenges of that, there is no doubt, but we are making considerable progress.
Are you worried about the here and now? Are you worried about blackout risks? Are you worried about the amount of consumption data is taking up in Ireland?
Data is taking up considerable demand in energy terms. But we have been robust in terms of meeting that to date, and I'm confident that we have the right mix to maintain that sort of robust response. I mean, for us, the two key pillars of the next stage of economic growth is digitalisation and climate and the green economy. So our investments are targeted as we emerge from COVID towards the green economy and towards digitalisation. And we've got to try and marry the two in respect of the various challenges that will arise from them. And COVID has taught us many lessons and has accelerated some of the push on the technology front, particularly in terms of the delivery of health services. And also, we think, has given people a closer connection with nature and an appreciation of existential threats. That COVID has created that in terms of a pandemic and a virus. People now have a greater, I think, understanding of how near now that existential threat climate change represents than perhaps they may have had prior to COVID.
So talk to us about net zero by 2050. Will Ireland achieve it?
Yes, and we've passed a climate law in Ireland, which sets very ambitious targets of reducing emissions by about 51% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And that is a very strong commitment of ours across every sector. And by the end of the year, we will be publishing carbon budgets for each individual sector, from transport to agriculture and to industry. And we have to move fast as a country, and we have set very challenging targets, but we are absolutely determined with our European Union colleagues to achieve them.
Irish Prime Minister Micheál Martin speaking exclusively with Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde on Ireland's climate goals and Europe's energy supply problems. And policymakers all across the continent are attempting to ease pressures on gas prices that hit record highs last week. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Rachel Morrison. So, Rachel, to what degree are we going to just have to get used to higher energy prices in electricity and gas?
It certainly looks like the high prices that we're seeing at the moment aren't going anywhere soon. Obviously, we have this supply crunch and winter hasn't even started. Winter is the time when we use more energy and prices generally are higher. So at least for this winter, we're going to see higher prices. And generally, I think most people agree that energy prices are going to go up.
Let's talk about the kind of energy we're using, because obviously there's a pivot toward green. This energy transition is underway. And are renewables going to be a problem going forward?
It's interesting. That's something that policymakers have pointed to this gas crisis as highlighting the need for more renewables, and therefore we would get ourselves off the influence of the high-priced gas. But with that comes the intermittency problem, which no one seems to have solved yet. It's been a problem in the UK, across Europe, where a period of unusually low wind has coincided with these high gas prices and has caused chaos. And so it's coming up with solutions to that. How do we back up the intermittent renewable generation with something that's also clean?
So, Rachel, let's look forward to COP26. It's just about a month away. How big of a deal is this energy crisis going to be for those attending?
it's going to overshadow things if we don't find any kind of solution before then. We have the topic coming up with European leaders. Now ministers are talking about it. It's becoming widespread, and as those costs get passed on to consumers, we're going to see politicians talking about it more. It's going to be weighing on them as the costs go through into bills. And so I think it could be quite a big part of what one of the concerns going into COP, and people are worried that it's going to slow down progress towards net zero if high costs come along with that net zero trajectory.
A lot's on the agenda. Bloomberg's Rachel Morrison, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, as we count down to COP, the leaders of the world's two largest economies and emitters promise to boost their efforts to fight climate change. We hear from U.S. climate envoy John Kerry next. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. Well, President Biden has pledged to double the money the U.S. will spend helping poorer nations fight climate change. It has drawn a mixed response from environmentalists ahead of COP26 in November, which many believe is the last real chance to clinch an effective deal. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry has been pressing the case globally. He spoke with Bloomberg this week.
I think more countries are becoming aware they've got to step up their game before we go to Glasgow for the Conference of the Parties meeting. We also have had the United States, President Biden, put on the table a doubling of the amount of money that the United States will do in terms of the $100 billion total that has to be put together. China announced yesterday they will no longer fund coal externally in other countries. So people are taking steps. People are beginning to build some momentum, I think. The question is, will it be enough?
So, as you say, President Biden doubled the commitment from the United States toward the $100 billion. Is that enough? Because I've seen some estimates that say that actually it should be more like $40 billion should be the U.S. share toward that $100 billion.
Well, they doubled the doubling, and I think everybody understands that we have a complicated Congress right now. I think it's what the market will bear, but it's also a significant increase of the United States effort. I mean, President Biden is putting more, about 11 billion plus on the table, and that's an important contribution. Other countries need to also do their part.
You said what the market will bear, maybe what Congress will bear. Is it your best estimate, having served there for so long, that actually you can get the 11.4 billion through this Congress?
Yeah, for sure. I really believe that. I think that there's a majority in Congress now that understands, after this summer, Mother Nature's messages to the United States and the world have been pretty clear, and that is that the climate crisis is growing. It already costs us hundreds of billions of dollars. That's what we spend for the intensity of the storms we're witnessing, the flooding, the amount of fire loss, damages, the warming of the ocean. These things are all growing in their ability to be able to disrupt the marketplace. And if you want to look at real cost, that disruption is hundreds of times beyond the amount that's being asked to help solve the problem.
President Biden clearly has made climate a priority, including making you his special envoy on climate questions. We have the budget proposal kicking around the Congress right now, up to $3.5 trillion. A significant portion of that is devoted to climate. Can that get through reconciliation?
Well, I hope it can. I mean, that's beyond my pay grade right now. I'm the climate guy, not the budget guy, or the, I know that the White House is working hard, the president's working hard on that. And I hope it will happen because it's actually not an expenditure. It's an investment that will repay itself many times over in the United States. Many countries are now chasing new technologies. We need to be doing that. We need to be the country that we've traditionally been, where we're the people who go to the moon, invent the internet, can drive a rover around Mars. I mean, we do amazing things when we put ourselves to the task. We need to do that now so that we're helping to invent, if not inventing ourselves, the new fuels, the new storage capacity, the battery storage, the green hydrogen, the direct air carbon capture, the carbon capture utilization and storage techniques. There are so many things that need to be done in this, David, that we've got to We've got to, unleash this incredible entrepreneurial, innovative skill we have in America. And I think there are a majority of people in the United States Congress who can see the benefit of doing so.
That was U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. Meanwhile, COP26 President Alok Sharma told Bloomberg that he welcomed the pledge, but developed nations need to do more.
Collectively, donor nations, developed nations have to deliver on this $100 billion a year figure, which was promised back in 2009. And the developed countries said that from 2020 onwards up to 2025, every year, $100 billion would be mobilized. So I think this does provide a boost, and I think it will act as an unblocker in some of the discussions that are ongoing on. And I hope what it will also ensure is that it provides a spur for other donors to come forward as well with additional commitments.
In addition to that, just referencing President Biden's speech, he talked about the fact that there can be intense disagreements among countries, but that in the end, we're all fighting together on certain things, climate being one of them, which brings me to China. Can Western countries and China work together on this in a real meaningful way when there's so many tensions, whether you're dealing with trade or human rights?
I can tell you from all the conversations that I've had is that countries around the world recognize that climate change is a great leveler. It does not recognize borders, and they can see themselves what is happening in their own countries. This isn't just about something that's happening internationally. This is happening in the nations around the world. So they see the reason why we need to work together on this. What we want to see are two things. One of the detailed policies that deliver on these commitments, and the second, and this is really important, are those commitments in the near term, the 2030 emission reduction targets that every G20 nation, indeed every nation in the world, needs to come forward with. But I think particularly the biggest emitters need to set those out before COP26.
And the difficulty is kind of what happens in the medium term. And this leads us to what we're seeing in Europe and the UK in terms of, record high power prices and LNG prices. You're seeing high LNG prices over in Asia as well. That hurts. How do we do this? How do we avoid those things? Don't we need things like coal and nuclear, the stuff we want to phase out? Don't we need that, though, in the medium term?
Well, I think the first thing to this issue of what's happening in terms of the gas markets, I can say with confidence that consumers will not face sort of huge spikes. And of course, the other issue is certainty of supply. And again, I know there's been a lot of this in the media, but our energy minister has been talking to the sector, and I think our view is very clearly that there are not going to be issues in terms of supplies this winter. But there is a wider point, of course, is that we need, this just spurs on the need for us to do more in terms of renewables, both in terms of offshore wind, in terms of solar, but then also the base load as well in building forward in hydrogen, for instance, which I know is an area that lots of governments are currently focused on. And I can tell you from the UK experience, in less than 10 years, we have gone from 40% of our electricity coming from coal to less than 2% now. And by the end of 2024, we will have no more coal in our energy mix. And the reason that we've been able to do this is that we have built the biggest offshore wind sector in the world, and we're going to quadruple that over the next 10 years. So, we have demonstrated, other countries have demonstrated that actually the way forward is clean energy, and that's a transition that we want to see around the world.
A lot to look out for as we enter the final stretch on the road to COP26. That's it for this week's edition, but you can keep the conversation going. Follow us on Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lines in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green.